My family assumed that my hospitalization meant I could no longer manage my own affairs, so they took control of my assets and sold my property for my own protection. The protection I actually needed was from them, which is why I bought their dream home and made them tenants in the house they thought they were going to own. But let me start from the moment when a routine surgery became their opportunity to strip away everything I'd built over 76 years of independence. I was lying in my hospital bed on the morning of day 4, still groggy from the anesthesia, but finally alert enough to understand conversations happening around me, when my daughter Patricia and my son Stephen walked into my room, carrying a folder thick with documents and wearing the determined expressions of people who had made difficult but necessary decisions. "Mom," Patricia said, settling into the chair beside my bed with the careful posture of someone about to deliver news that wouldn't be welcomed, "we need to talk about some practical matters while you're recovering." Practical matters. The phrase that families use when they've been making plans without consulting the person most affected by those plans, when they've convinced themselves that taking control is the same as providing care. "What kind of practical matters?" I asked, though something in their coordinated presence and formal documentation suggested this wasn't going to be a conversation, but rather a presentation of decisions already made. Stephen opened the folder and pulled out papers that I recognized even through my post-surgical fog: real estate documents, power of attorney forms, and what appeared to be financial statements. "Mom, Patricia and I have been discussing your living situation, and we think it's time to make some changes that will be better for everyone involved." Changes that will be better for everyone involved. Translation: changes that would make them feel less worried about my independence and more confident about my future care, regardless of what I might want for my own life. "We've decided to sell the house," Patricia said, speaking quickly as if getting the words out faster would make them easier to accept. "It's too big for you to maintain alone, too expensive to heat and cool efficiently, and frankly, Mom, too much responsibility for someone your age to handle." Too much responsibility for someone your age. The phrase that had become the justification for every limitation they wanted to impose, every decision they wanted to make on my behalf, every aspect of independence they thought I should surrender. "The house isn't for sale," I said, trying to sit up straighter in my hospital bed, despite the tubing and monitoring equipment that made movement awkward. "Actually, Mom," Stephen said, producing more papers from the folder, "it already is. We listed it yesterday with a real estate agent who specializes in senior transitions. We're using the power of attorney that you signed when you went into surgery. The power of attorney that I had signed for medical emergencies, not for asset management. The legal document that was supposed to ensure I received appropriate medical care if I was unconscious, not to give them authority to sell my home while I was recovering from surgery. You can't sell my house without my permission." "Mom," Patricia said, her voice taking on the patient tone she used when she thought I was being unreasonable, "we're not selling it without your permission. We're selling it for your own good. The proceeds will go into an investment account that will provide better financial security for your retirement." For my own good. The phrase that had replaced "with your permission" in every conversation about my future, as if my own judgment about what was good for me had become irrelevant. "Besides," Stephen added, "you won't be able to live there once you're discharged. The doctor said you'll need several weeks of rehabilitation, and the house has too many stairs, too many maintenance issues. We've already started looking at assisted living facilities that would be much more appropriate for your recovery." Assisted living facilities. They had progressed from selling my house to planning my permanent relocation, all while I was sedated and unable to participate in conversations about my own future. "I'm not moving to assisted living, Mom," Patricia said. "You can't take care of a 4-bedroom house with a swimming pool and 2 acres of property. You couldn't handle that kind of responsibility even before your surgery." Even before your surgery. They were using my temporary medical situation to justify permanent changes they'd apparently been wanting to make for some time, treating my hospitalization as evidence that I needed comprehensive life management rather than temporary care. "We found a lovely place called Meadowbrook Manor," Stephen continued, producing brochures from his seemingly endless folder. "It has excellent rehabilitation facilities, beautiful grounds, and most importantly, professional staff available 24/7 to help with anything you need." Professional staff available 24/7, translation: other people making decisions about my daily life, my schedule, my activities, and my independence. I lay back against my hospital pillows, processing the scope of what they had planned while I was unconscious. They hadn't just decided to sell my house, they had redesigned my entire future, moving me from independent homeowner to assisted living resident without consulting me about any aspect of these life-altering decisions. But what they didn't know was that their assumption about my inability to manage my own affairs was based on a fundamental misunderstanding of exactly what affairs I had been managing for the past 30 years. What they were about to discover was that their mother had been far more financially sophisticated than they had ever imagined, and that their attempt to protect my assets was about to become the biggest mistake of their well-intentioned lives. The morning after Patricia and Stephen's announcement about selling my house, I did something I had been avoiding since my surgery. I called my financial advisor, Thomas Mitchell, from my hospital bed to assess exactly what assets I had available for what was about to become the most satisfying real estate transaction of my life. "Mrs. Henderson," Thomas said, his voice carrying the concern that came from hearing I was hospitalized. "How are you feeling? Should we postpone any financial discussions until you're fully recovered?" "Thomas, I'm feeling clear enough to make some significant financial decisions. My children have sold my house without my consent, and I need to understand my options for immediate real estate purchases." There was a pause on the other end of the line, the kind of silence that comes when a professional is recalculating everything they thought they knew about a client's situation. "They sold your house? The Elm Street property? They're selling it. They assume that my hospitalization means I can't manage my own affairs." "Mrs. Henderson, do your children understand the scope of your investment portfolio?" That was the question I had been dreading and anticipating for years. Thomas knew something that Patricia and Stephen had never known, something I had deliberately kept private, because I valued their love more than their awareness of my wealth. For 30 years, since my husband died and left me with what they thought was a modest life insurance settlement, I had been building a real estate investment empire that now included 47 properties across 3 states. What they saw as my simple suburban lifestyle was actually the careful management of assets worth approximately $12 million. "No, Thomas, they don't know about any of it. They don't know about the rental properties, the commercial real estate, the investment accounts. They think I live on Social Security and a small pension. They have no idea that the pension checks they occasionally see are actually dividends from a portfolio that generates more income in a month than most people earn in a year." I had kept this secret, not out of shame or fear, but out of love. I wanted my children to love me for who I was, rather than what I owned. To visit because they enjoyed my company, rather than because they were concerned about their inheritance. I wanted authentic relationships, uncomplicated by the dynamics that wealth often creates in families. But their betrayal of my trust, their assumption that I needed them to manage my life, had changed my perspective on what they deserved to know about my capabilities. "Thomas, I need you to do something for me. I want you to research a property at 847 Mansion Drive in the Whitmore Estates development." Whitmore Estates, the exclusive gated community where Stephen had been trying to buy a house for the past 2 years, where Patricia and her husband had been looking at properties they couldn't quite afford, where my successful children had been dreaming of living among the kind of wealthy people they aspired to become. The Tudor-style mansion that's been on the market for 8 months? That's the one. I want you to make an all-cash offer well above asking price, with a closing date in 2 weeks. "Mrs. Henderson, that property is listed at $2.3 million, and I want to offer $2.6 million to ensure we get it immediately." Thomas was quiet again, processing the implications of what I was asking him to do. "May I ask why you want that particular property?" "Because Stephen has been trying to buy it for months, but his financing keeps falling through. Because Patricia and James have been driving through that neighborhood every weekend, looking at houses they dream of owning someday. Because they've spent years assuming that their mother is a financial burden they need to manage, when in fact their mother could buy their dream home with cash and still have enough left over to purchase several more." "Mrs. Henderson, are you sure you want to make such a significant purchase while you're hospitalized and dealing with family stress?" "Thomas, I've never been more sure of anything. But there's one more thing I need you to do." "What's that?" "I don't want my name on any of the public documents until after the closing. Use the Elm Street Properties LLC that we established for my other acquisitions. I want this purchase to be completely confidential until I'm ready to reveal it. The Elm Street Properties LLC that my children didn't know existed, the business entity that held most of my real estate investments and had been generating steady income for over a decade." "I understand. Mrs. Henderson, when do you plan to reveal this purchase to your family?" "When Stephen calls to tell me that someone has outbid him on his dream house, And when Patricia starts complaining about the unfairness of wealthy people pricing out hardworking families like hers. And then I'm going to teach them a lesson about making assumptions about other people's financial capabilities. That afternoon, while I was pretending to nap in my hospital bed, Thomas called to confirm that our offer had been accepted. The sellers were so pleased with the all-cash offer and quick closing that they had agreed immediately despite having multiple other interested buyers. One of those other interested buyers was Stephen, whose financing application was still pending approval and whose offer was contingent on selling his current house. But the most satisfying part of the transaction wasn't the fact that I had outbid my son for his dream house. It was the knowledge that within 2 weeks, I would own the property that represented everything my children thought they understood about wealth, success, and financial sophistication. They thought they needed to manage my assets for my own protection. What they were about to learn was that their mother had been quietly building wealth that exceeded their combined net worth, and that their protection had just cost them the house they'd been dreaming of for years. 2 weeks after my discharge from the hospital, I was sitting in my temporary furnished apartment, a luxury short-term rental that Thomas had arranged while my children tried to finalize the sale of my actual home, when Stephen called with news that would set up the most satisfying revelation of my 76 years. "Mom, I have some disappointing news about the house Patricia and I have been trying to buy in Whitmore Estates." I settled back in my chair, prepared to enjoy every moment of what was coming next. "What happened, dear?" "Someone outbid us. An all-cash offer that was 30% above asking price. Our real estate agent said she'd never seen anything like it. Whoever bought it didn't even inspect the property first. Just made an offer so high that the sellers couldn't refuse." "That must be very disappointing for you." "It's frustrating because we've been working on this purchase for months. The financing was finally approved. We had inspections scheduled, and then some wealthy investor comes in and just takes it away from families who actually wanted to live there." Some wealthy investor. If only he knew how accurate that description was. "Stephen, I'm sorry things didn't work out the way you'd hoped. The worst part is that our agent thinks it was probably bought as an investment property by someone who already owns multiple homes. People like that are pricing out regular families who just want one nice home to live in. People like that. Regular families." The irony was beautiful. My son was complaining about wealthy real estate investors while simultaneously trying to sell his mother's house without her consent because he thought she couldn't manage her own financial affairs. "Have you heard anything more about the sale of my house?" I asked. "Actually, yes. We have 3 offers, all above asking price. Patricia and I think we should accept the highest one and close as soon as possible. The proceeds will go into the investment account we set up for you, and we can start looking at assisted living places that fit your budget." The investment account we set up for you, they had established financial arrangements for me without my input, just as they had listed my house without my permission. "Stephen, I need to tell you something." "What's that, Mom?" "I'm not moving to assisted living." "Mom, we've discussed this. The house is too much for you to handle, especially after your surgery. You need to be somewhere with professional support." "I'm not moving to assisted living because I've purchased another house." The silence on Stephen's end of the call was so complete that I wondered if the connection had dropped. "You, what?" "I bought a house. I'll be moving in next week." "Mom, what are you talking about? You can't buy a house. You don't have that kind of money, and besides, we've been managing your finances while you recover." "You don't have that kind of money." The assumption that had justified their entire approach to protecting my assets. "Stephen, where exactly do you think I've been living for the past 30 years? In the house we're selling for you. And how do you think I afforded that house? How do you think I've been paying property taxes, maintenance, utilities, and living expenses for 3 decades? Your pension and Social Security." "Stephen, my pension is $800 a month. Social Security is $1,400. How do you think I've been managing a $3,000 monthly mortgage payment, plus all other expenses on $2,200 in fixed income?" I could practically hear him calculating, trying to reconcile the numbers that had never quite made sense, but that he'd never bothered to question. "I assumed you had savings from Dad's life insurance." "I did have savings, Stephen. What I didn't have was the need to spend them on basic living expenses because I've been generating income from other sources for 30 years. "What other sources?" "Real estate investments, business ventures, Financial portfolios that you and Patricia never knew about because I chose not to discuss my private financial affairs with my children. Mom, are you saying you've been wealthy this whole time? I'm saying that the woman you thought needed asset protection has been protecting and growing assets worth more than you and Patricia have ever imagined. How much more? I paused, knowing that the number I was about to share would change everything they thought they knew about their mother, their inheritance, and their own financial status relative to mine. Stephen, I'm worth approximately $12 million. The silence this time lasted so long that I checked my phone to make sure the call was still connected. 12 million? Yes, and the house I just purchased is the one you've been trying to buy in Whitmore Estates. The house on Mansion Drive? That's the one. I closed on it yesterday for $2.6 million. Cash.
You bought our house?
I bought the house you wanted to buy. Yes. It seemed like a good investment property, and I thought the location was excellent. But why didn't you tell us? Why did you let us think you needed financial management? Because I wanted to see what you would do when you thought I couldn't protect myself. I wanted to know whether you would respect my autonomy and consult me about major decisions, or whether you would take control of my life without my consent. Mom, we were trying to help you. Stephen, you were trying to help yourselves feel less worried about me. There's a difference. So what happens now? Now you and Patricia are going to discover what it feels like to have someone else make decisions about your living situation without consulting you first. The conversation that followed with Patricia was remarkably similar, though with additional tears and what sounded like genuine remorse rather than just shock. But the real test would come when I invited them to see their dream home and explained the new rental arrangements I'd prepared for their future living situation. 3 days after my phone call with Stephen, I invited both my children to tour the house I'd purchased, telling them only that I wanted their opinion on some furniture arrangements and that I had something important to discuss with them about living situations. When they arrived at the gates of Whitmore Estates, I could see the confusion on their faces as the security guard checked their names against my guest list and directed them to 847 Mansion Drive. Mom, Patricia said as she got out of her car in front of the Tudor mansion they'd been dreaming about for months. Why are we here? Whose house is this? It's mine, I said simply, walking up the front steps and unlocking the door with my new key. I wanted you to see it before you made any final decisions about where you think I should be living. The interior tour that followed was surreal. Watching my children walk through rooms they had memorized from online listings, touching fixtures they had imagined owning, standing in the kitchen where they had pictured themselves hosting dinner parties and holiday gatherings. Mom, Stephen said, his voice hollow with disbelief. This is the house we've been trying to buy. Yes, I know. You mentioned that you were disappointed about being outbid.
You're the investor who outbid us.
I'm the investor who outbid you. Yes. Patricia was standing in the living room, turning slowly to take in the custom millwork, the coffered ceilings, the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the professionally landscaped grounds. Mom, how is this possible? How could you afford this? I led them to the kitchen island and spread out documents that Thomas had prepared for this conversation. Financial statements, property deeds, business registrations, and investment portfolios that detailed 30 years of wealth accumulation they had never suspected. This is how it's possible, I said, watching their expressions change as they processed the numbers. 47 rental properties generating $68,000 in monthly income. Commercial real estate investments worth $4.2 million. Stock portfolios that have been growing steadily for 3 decades. Business partnerships that you never knew existed. Stephen was staring at a bank statement that showed an account balance larger than his annual salary. Mom, why didn't you tell us about any of this? Because I wanted you to love me for who I am, not what I own. Because I wanted authentic relationships with my children, not relationships complicated by expectations about inheritance or resentment about wealth inequality. But you let us worry about your financial security. You let us think you might not have enough money for retirement, for medical care, for maintaining your independence. I let you think what you chose to think, based on assumptions you never bothered to verify. Stephen, in 30 years, did you ever ask to see my financial statements? Did you ever inquire about how I was managing to live in a paid-off house with investment income? Patricia was looking through the property management documents for my rental portfolio. Mom, you've been a landlord this whole time? I've been a real estate investor, a business owner, and a portfolio manager. The grandmother you thought needed asset protection has been protecting and growing assets worth more than both of your net worths combined. So when we sold your house, when you sold my house without my permission, you liquidated one small piece of a much larger real estate empire. The house you thought represented my only major asset was actually about 2% of my total wealth. Stephen sat down heavily on one of the kitchen stools, processing the implications. And now you own our dream house.
I own a house that you wanted to buy, yes. But Stephen, I have a proposition for you.
What kind of proposition? I pulled out one more document from Thomas's folder, a lease agreement that I'd had prepared specifically for this conversation. You and Patricia both need places to live. You've been house hunting for months without finding anything suitable. I have a 6-bedroom mansion with more space than one elderly woman could possibly use. Patricia looked up from the financial documents she'd been studying. Are you offering to let us live here? I'm offering to rent you rooms here. You can each have a wing of the house, completely private, with your own entrances and living spaces. The rent would be quite reasonable. Actually, the low market rate for this area. You want us to be your tenants? I want you to experience what it feels like to have someone else control your living situation, make decisions about your housing arrangements, and manage your residential future according to what they think is best for you. Stephen was reading through the lease agreement, and I could see him processing the role reversal. Mom, this is exactly what you did to me, except that I'm asking for your consent rather than making decisions while you're unconscious in a hospital bed. Patricia's eyes were filling with tears, but I couldn't tell if they were tears of embarrassment, gratitude, or something more complex. Mom, I need to apologize. For what specifically? For treating you like you couldn't manage your own life. For making decisions about your future without involving you. For assuming that being hospitalized meant you needed comprehensive life management. Patricia, you were trying to protect me. But we were also trying to control you. We were using your temporary medical situation to justify permanent changes you never asked for. Stephen looked up from the lease agreement. Mom, what do you want from us now? I want you to understand that competence and independence don't automatically decrease with age or temporary health issues. I want you to recognize that assuming someone needs protection might actually be protecting them from exercising their own capabilities. And if we agree to live here as your tenants, then you'll learn what I learned when you tried to manage my living situation, that having someone else control your housing can be helpful or harmful, depending on whether that control is exercised with respect for your autonomy or with assumptions about your limitations. The conversation that followed established new rules for our family relationships, new boundaries around decision-making and financial privacy, and new respect for capabilities that had been underestimated on both sides. But most importantly, it established that their elderly mother was not a burden to be managed, but a savvy businesswoman who had been building wealth while they were building assumptions about her decline. 6 months after moving into the Whitmore Estates mansion as their mother's tenants, Patricia and Stephen had learned more about real estate investment, wealth management, and business development than they had acquired in their previous decades of professional careers. Every morning over coffee in the mansion's breakfast room, I shared aspects of my investment strategy that they had never suspected existed. Property acquisition techniques I'd learned through trial and error, tenant management approaches that had evolved over 30 years of being a landlord, and financial planning principles that had grown a modest life insurance settlement into a multi-million-dollar portfolio. Mom, Patricia said during one of our morning briefings, I need to ask you something that's been bothering me. What's that, dear? When Stephen and I sold your house, we thought we were protecting your assets and ensuring your financial security. But we were actually interfering with business operations we didn't know existed. I nodded, sipping my coffee while looking out at the grounds that a landscaping crew was maintaining as part of my property management services. Patricia, the house you sold was generating rental income. I had been renting out the guest house and the converted garage apartment to graduate students for 8 years. When you forced the sale, you eliminated $2,400 in monthly income without realizing it. We cost you money by trying to help you. You cost me money by making assumptions about my financial sophistication. But more importantly, you cost yourselves the opportunity to understand what I had built and potentially participate in expanding it. Stephen, who had been reviewing property management reports for my rental portfolio, looked up from his laptop. Mom, I've been analyzing your investment returns over the past decade, And your property selection strategy is remarkably sophisticated. Some of these acquisitions have appreciated by over 200. Stephen, I've been learning real estate investment for 30 years. When your father died and left me with $200,000 in life insurance, I could have put it in savings accounts and lived modestly on the interest. Instead, I used it as a down payment on my first rental property and started building wealth that could support a more interesting retirement. But why didn't you tell us? We could have helped, or at least learned from what you were doing. Because you both thought you understood my financial situation, and you never asked questions that would have revealed how wrong your assumptions were. Patricia was looking through the lease agreement that had evolved into something more like a business partnership over the past 6 months. Mom, what you've created here isn't just a living arrangement. It's like a real estate education program where we're learning while contributing to property management and development. She was right. Over the months since they'd moved in, both Patricia and Stephen had become involved in various aspects of managing my portfolio. Patricia, with her accounting background, had streamlined my bookkeeping systems and tax preparation. Stephen, with his marketing experience, had developed improved advertising strategies for rental properties and tenant screening processes. What you've created, I said, is what could have happened from the beginning if you had approached my financial situation with curiosity instead of assumptions. Mom, Stephen said, I have a proposition for you. What kind of proposition? I want to leave my job and work with you full-time on expanding the real estate portfolio. Patricia wants to do the same thing. We want to turn this into a family business. A family business? 6 months ago, they had been selling my house without my consent because they thought I couldn't manage my own affairs. Now they wanted to quit their corporate jobs to work in the real estate empire they'd never known I was running. Stephen, that would mean giving up your salary, your benefits, your professional security. Mom, it would mean working with someone whose investment strategy has generated better returns than most professional real estate firms. It would mean learning from 30 years of experience that we didn't know existed. Patricia was nodding enthusiastically. Mom, what you've built is exactly what Stephen and I have been trying to achieve in our own careers: financial independence, diversified income streams, and work that provides both security and growth potential. But it would also mean working for your mother, taking direction from someone you recently thought needed comprehensive life management. It would mean working with our mother, who turned out to be one of the most successful investors we know. I looked at my children, my tenants, my business partners, my students in real estate investment, and realized that their betrayal of my trust had ultimately created the opportunity for relationships based on mutual respect rather than protective concern. There's one condition, I said. What's that? If we're going to work together, you need to understand that this business operates according to my judgment and experience, not according to your assumptions about what's appropriate for someone my age. Absolutely. And you need to accept that I've been successfully managing complex financial affairs for 3 decades without your oversight, and I don't need your oversight now. We understand. And most importantly, you need to remember that assuming someone needs protection often means protecting them from exercising their own capabilities. 3 months later, Henderson Family Properties was officially incorporated, with me as CEO, Patricia as CFO, and Stephen as Director of Acquisitions. Our first major project was the purchase of a 12-unit apartment complex that had been generating $28,000 in monthly rental income and was available at below-market pricing due to deferred maintenance issues. The property required $180,000 in renovations and improvements, which I paid in cash from accounts that my children were still discovering existed. But the real transformation wasn't in our business expansion or family dynamics. It was in what happened when other families heard about our story and began questioning their own assumptions about aging, competence, and financial independence. 2 years after my children had sold my house while I was hospitalized, I was standing in front of the National Real Estate Investment Association's annual conference, delivering a keynote address titled Hidden Wealth: How Family Assumptions Can Undermine Senior Financial Independence. The audience of 1,200 real estate professionals, financial advisors, and family wealth managers had come to hear about research findings that challenged conventional understanding of aging, financial competence, and intergenerational wealth transfer. The traditional model of elder financial planning, I told them, assumes that aging means declining capacity to manage complex investments, make sophisticated business decisions, and adapt to changing market conditions. Our case study suggests that these assumptions are not only incorrect, but potentially harmful to both seniors and their families. I clicked to the next slide, showing the growth trajectory of Henderson family properties since my children had discovered the scope of my wealth and business acumen. When adult children assume their parents need financial protection, they often protect them from exercising exactly the capabilities that could benefit the entire family. When my children sold my house without my consent, they were eliminating income-generating assets while trying to secure my financial future. The irony was still remarkable. They had cost me money while trying to protect my assets, had undermined my business while trying to manage my affairs. But perhaps more significantly, I continued, they were depriving themselves of opportunities to learn from someone whose investment experience exceeded their own. After my presentation, a woman approached me with questions about implementing financial education programs for families dealing with aging and wealth transfer issues.
Mrs. Henderson, I'm curious about the psychological impact of discovering that your assumptions about someone's financial sophistication were completely wrong. How did your children handle learning that their mother was actually wealthier and more business savvy than they were?
Initially with shock and embarrassment, but ultimately with gratitude for the learning opportunities that their mistake had revealed. And how did it change your family dynamics? It transformed protective relationships into collaborative partnerships. It replaced assumptions with curiosity and concern with respect. That evening, Patricia, Stephen, and I had dinner in the mansion's dining room, not to discuss my recovery from hospitalization, but to review acquisition opportunities for the following quarter and evaluate expansion strategies for our growing real estate portfolio. Mom, Patricia said, reviewing financial projections for a commercial property we were considering, I need to tell you something.
What's that?
2 years ago, when we sold your house, I thought we were being responsible adult children taking care of a parent who couldn't manage complex decisions anymore. And now I realize we were being presumptuous adult children who had never bothered to understand what our parent was actually capable of managing. Stephen, who had been analyzing market trends for multifamily residential properties, looked up from his research. Mom, can I ask you something I should have asked years ago? Of course. How did you learn real estate investment? How did you develop the expertise to build a portfolio this sophisticated? The same way you're learning it now, Stephen, by reading, researching, asking questions, making mistakes, and paying attention to results. But you were doing this for 30 years without anyone knowing. I was doing this for 30 years because I enjoyed the intellectual challenge, the financial growth, and the independence it provided. Whether anyone knew about it was irrelevant to the work itself. Patricia was looking at the latest property management reports for our rental portfolio, which now included 53 properties generating over $89,000 in monthly income. Mom, what you built while we thought you were just living quietly in your suburban house, it's extraordinary. Patricia, what I built was the result of treating real estate investments seriously, consistently, and strategically. The extraordinary part isn't what I accomplished, it's that you assumed I couldn't accomplish it. 6 months later, I received a call that would mark the ultimate validation of everything that had happened since my hospitalization and my children's well-intentioned betrayal. Forbes magazine was featuring me in their Unexpected Entrepreneurs series, focusing on business builders whose success had been hidden from their own families until dramatic revelation moments. The article, titled "The Secret Real Estate Mogul: How One Grandmother Built a $115 million Portfolio While Her Children Planned Her Assisted Living," included interviews with Patricia and Stephen about the experience of discovering their mother's hidden business empire. "We thought we were protecting her assets," Stephen was quoted as saying. "We had no idea she was protecting and growing assets worth more than we'd ever imagined." The article also included commentary from financial experts about the frequency of intergenerational misunderstandings regarding financial competence and the tendency for families to underestimate senior investment capabilities. But the recognition that meant the most came from other families who had read our story and begun questioning their own assumptions about aging and financial independence. Letters from adult children who had discovered their parents' hidden business successes. Stories from seniors who had felt pressured to surrender financial control and had used our example to maintain their independence. Examples of families who had replaced protective oversight with collaborative partnerships. My children assumed that my hospitalization meant I could no longer manage my own affairs, so they took control of my assets and sold my property for my own protection. What they discovered was that I had been managing affairs worth $15 million while they were managing assumptions about my limitations. The protection I actually needed was from their good intentions, which is why I bought their dream home and made them tenants in the house they thought they were going to own. Sometimes the best thing that can happen to a family is having their assumptions challenged by results that prove those assumptions wrong. Because when you stop protecting people from exercising their capabilities, you often discover capabilities you never knew existed. If you've ever been told you need someone else to manage your affairs, make decisions about your living situation, or protect your assets for your own good, remember that competence doesn't automatically decline with age or temporary health challenges. This was my truth, and it began with a hospital stay that my children thought proved I needed their protection, but that actually provided the perfect opportunity to prove I was the one who should have been protecting them from their own financial limitations.